Hi, friends. Thank you for joining tonight's Rock and Roll Bedtime Story, featuring legendary musicians like Jerry Garcia's Grateful Dead or Janis Joplin, and will take us to places like the Haight-Ashbury in the late 60s. So, get tucked in for Dreams of the Summer of Love, a gentle journey through Haight-Ashbury. In the soft hours before dawn, when San Francisco sleeps beneath her blanket of fog, the Victorian houses of Haight-Ashbury stand like gentle guardians along the quiet streets. These painted ladies, as they came to be known, wear their colors like dreams. Soft lavenders that whisper of morning glories, warm yellows that hold the promise of sunshine, and gentle blues that mirror the sky just before it blushes with dawn. The fog moves through the neighborhood like a slow, silver river, touching each ornate window frame, each delicate piece of gingerbread trim that adorns these century-old homes. In 1967, these houses would become sanctuaries for young souls seeking something deeper than the world had offered them. But in these quiet morning moments, they simply rest, their painted surfaces catching the first tender rays of light that filter through the mist. Listen, do you hear it? The soft creak of old wooden floors as someone pads barefoot across polished hardwood, the gentle whisper of curtains being drawn back from tall windows. Somewhere, 3 houses down, an acoustic guitar finds its voice in tentative, sleepy chords. Just a few notes that float on the morning air like dandelion seeds carried by the gentlest breeze. The scent of jasmine drifts from hidden gardens tucked behind these narrow houses, night-blooming jasmine that has been sharing its sweetness with the darkness, now preparing to rest as the sun slowly burns through the fog. Mixed with it comes the earthy smell of eucalyptus from the park nearby, and something else, something that speaks of possibility, of young dreams taking root in this magical corner of the world. Window by window, the neighborhood awakens, not with the harsh urgency of alarm clocks or the rush of commuter traffic, but with the organic rhythm of people who have chosen to live differently. A young woman appears in a third-story window, her long hair catching the filtered sunlight as she waters a small plant on her windowsill. Her movements are unhurried, peaceful, as if she has all the time in the world to tend to this one small act of nurturing. The painted houses seem to breathe with the neighborhood's gentle awakening. Their colors grow richer as the sun climbs higher, burning away the fog in soft, swirling wisps. Each house tells a story. The powder blue Victorian with its intricate white trim that will soon be home to a collective of musicians. The warm coral-colored home where poets gather in the evening to share their words. The sage greenhouse with its wraparound porch where neighbors will sit with cups of herbal tea, watching the world go by with peaceful eyes. This is how Haight-Ashbury wakes, not with a start, but with a gentle stretch, like a cat in a sunny window. The neighborhood that would soon become the heart of a cultural revolution begins each day in the same way it approaches everything else, with love, with patience, and with a deep reverence for the beauty that exists in simple moments. As you listen to this story, let yourself sink into that same gentle rhythm. Feel the morning fog surrounding you like a soft embrace, carrying you deeper into peaceful sleep. The corner where music lives. There was a corner in Haight-Ashbury where music seemed to live and breathe on its own. Not just any corner, but the place where small dreams grew into something larger than anyone could have imagined. In the early days, before the world knew what was happening in this little neighborhood, music existed in the most humble of spaces: coffee houses with mismatched chairs and wobbly tables, record shops where the smell of incense mixed with the warm vanilla scent of old vinyl. The Fillmore Auditorium stood like a sleeping giant, its marquee dark in those quiet morning hours we've just visited. But as the sun climbed higher and the fog lifted like a gentle curtain being drawn back, something magical would begin to stir within its walls. This was where music came to find its home, where sounds that had never been heard before would pour forth like water from a spring. Picture, if you will, the transformation that would happen as the day unfolded. The venue that had once hosted different kinds of gatherings now opened its heart to a new kind of community. Young people with guitars slung across their backs, carrying small amplifiers and dreams bigger than the cramped apartments they shared, would gather here as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows. The soundcheck became a meditation, not the frantic technical exercise it might be elsewhere, but a gentle conversation between musicians and their instruments, between the artists and the space that would hold their music. The acoustics of the Fillmore seemed to embrace every note, every whispered lyric, holding them tenderly before releasing them into the hearts of listeners. In the smaller venues scattered throughout the neighborhood, the same gentle alchemy was taking place. The coffee house on the corner where a young man named Jerry would sit in the back booth, his guitar case leaning against the wall, fingers moving absently across the strings in patterns that sounded like conversations with old friends. The record shop where Grace would browse through albums, her fingertips tracing the covers as if reading Braille, absorbing influences that would later bloom in her own ethereal voice. These weren't stages in the traditional sense, but living rooms that happened to welcome strangers. The boundary between performer and audience dissolved like sugar in warm tea. Someone might start a song in one corner, and by the end of it, 3 other voices would have joined in harmony, creating something that existed only in that moment, never to be repeated exactly the same way again. The music that emerged from these spaces wasn't manufactured or forced. It grew organically, like wildflowers pushing up through sidewalk cracks. Each song was a conversation, each performance a gathering of friends sharing their innermost thoughts. The amplifiers hummed with a gentle warmth. The guitars rang out with a clarity that seemed to cut through all the noise of the outside world, reaching directly into the soul. As evening approached, the music would spill out of the venues and into the streets themselves. Windows would be thrown open, and the sounds of rehearsals, of jam sessions, of spontaneous music making would float from house to house like invisible threads connecting the entire neighborhood. Someone learning a new chord progression on their front steps would hear an answering melody drifting from across the street, and without planning or discussion, a musical conversation would begin. This was the magic of those early days. Music wasn't something that happened on a schedule, wasn't confined to specific times and places. It was as natural and constant as breathing, as present and nurturing as the fog that wrapped around the neighborhood each evening. The music lived here, made its home here, and in return, it transformed everyone it touched. Let the gentle echo of those first tentative notes carry you deeper into rest, like a lullaby sung by the neighborhood itself, wrapping around you with all the gentleness of those magical San Francisco twilights.
From a freezing New York apartment to the song that started it all. In the winter of 1963, a young couple huddled in a freezing New York apartment, dreaming of warmth and possibility. John Phillips, a folk musician with grand ambitions, and his wife, Michelle, a beautiful California blonde with a voice like honey, were struggling to make ends meet in the harsh reality of East Coast winters. As snow piled against their windows and their breath formed clouds in the unheated room, John picked up his guitar and began to play a melody that would soon become the anthem of a generation. "All the leaves are brown and the sky is gray," he sang, his voice carrying the weight of longing for something more than the cold concrete jungle surrounding them. Michelle, wrapped in a blanket and sipping lukewarm coffee, listened as her husband's fingers found the chord progression that would eventually transport millions of listeners to sun-drenched California beaches and palm-lined boulevards. The song that would become California Dreaming wasn't born from inspiration alone, it was born from desperation. John Phillips had been chasing the folk music dream for years, moving from group to group, always on the verge of something bigger, but never quite breaking through. The New Journeymen, his previous trio, had shown promise, but dissolved like so many other folk acts of the early 60s. Now, trapped in a Manhattan winter that seemed to stretch endlessly, he found himself pouring his longing for escape into music. Michelle, born Holly Michelle Gilliam in Long Beach, California, understood that longing in a way that only a native Californian could. She had tasted the sweetness of Pacific breezes and felt the warmth of year-round sunshine on her skin. As she listened to John work out the melody that cold December morning, she could almost smell the orange blossoms and hear the distant crash of waves against the Malibu shore. But this wasn't just homesickness, it was something deeper. The song they were creating together captured the universal human desire for transformation, for the possibility that somewhere else, life could be different, better, more beautiful. California had become, in the American imagination, the place where dreams came true, where the weather was always perfect, and where young people could reinvent themselves against a backdrop of endless summer. The lyrics came naturally, almost as if they were channeling the collective unconscious of a generation ready to reject the cold conformity of the 1950s in favor of something warmer, more colorful, more free. "I'd be safe and warm if I was in LA," John sang, and Michelle could hear in his voice not just their personal longing, but the yearning of countless young Americans who felt trapped by convention and climate alike. As the song took shape over the following weeks, it became clear that they had stumbled upon something special. This wasn't just another folk song. It was a manifesto, a declaration of independence from everything that was gray and cold and limiting. The harmony they created together, her crystalline soprano floating above his warm baritone, seemed to embody the very essence of California sunshine. They couldn't have known, as they sat in that freezing apartment working out the final verses, that they were creating more than just a song. They were crafting the blueprint for an entire aesthetic, a sound that would define not just their own future success, but the entire California music scene of the 1960s. The song they were writing would eventually become the calling card for a group that didn't even exist yet, performed by voices that hadn't yet learned to blend in perfect harmony. In many ways, California Dreaming was prophetic. It predicted their own journey westward, their own escape from the confines of East Coast folk music into something bigger, more expansive, more golden. The song was their ticket to the promised land, their musical passport to a world where palm trees swayed in eternal breeze and where four voices could create something that sounded like heaven itself. As winter slowly gave way to spring and the song continued to evolve, John and Michelle Phillips began to dream not just of California, but of the group they would form there, the harmonies they would create, and the mansion in the hills where their musical dreams would finally come true. The birth of that song in a freezing New York apartment was really the birth of the mamas and the papas themselves. They just didn't know it yet.
Chapter 2. Go Where You Wanna Go, The Migration West. The winding journey from folk obscurity to Los Angeles dreams. The Phillips' journey to California wasn't a straight line from New York to Los Angeles. Like many seekers of the 1960s, they wandered through the folk scene, collecting musical partners and experiences along the way. John had already been part of the New Journeymen, a folk trio that showed promise but never quite caught fire. Michelle, born Holly Michelle Gilliam in Long Beach, had returned to her native California soil, but not before the couple had crisscrossed the country, playing small venues and dreaming of something bigger. Their migration west was part of a larger cultural movement that was reshaping American music in the mid-1960s. The folk revival that had begun in the late 1950s was evolving, becoming more electric, more pop-oriented, more commercially viable. Bob Dylan had already shocked the folk purists by going electric at the Newport Folk Festival, and the Beatles had proven that thoughtful songwriting could coexist with mass appeal. The time was right for a new kind of music that could bridge the gap between the intellectual honesty of folk and the emotional immediacy of pop. John Phillips understood this shift better than most. Born in South Carolina but raised in Virginia, he had been drawn to music from an early age, learning guitar and developing a songwriter's ear for melody and harmony. His early bands had been solidly within the folk tradition, but he possessed an innate understanding of what made a song commercially viable. He could hear the potential in a melody, could sense how a harmony might lift a song from good to great. Michelle's journey to music had been different but equally significant. Growing up in Los Angeles, she had been exposed to the California sound from its earliest days, absorbing the influence of the Beach Boys' harmonies and the laid-back aesthetic that would later define the entire West Coast scene. Her voice, pure and clear as mountain air, had been trained in the relaxed, conversational style that would become synonymous with California folk rock. Their first major stop on the road to Los Angeles was actually a step backward geographically. They found themselves in the Virgin Islands of all places, where John had been hired to perform at various resorts and hotels. It was there, in the tropical paradise that seemed like a preview of the California dream, that they began to refine their sound and develop the musical partnership that would later blossom into something extraordinary. The Virgin Islands gig was more than just a job. It was a laboratory for experimentation. Away from the pressures of the New York folk scene, John and Michelle had the freedom to explore different sounds, different harmonies, different ways of presenting their music. They began to understand how their voices worked together, how Michelle's ethereal soprano could float above John's more grounded baritone, creating a sound that was both earthly and celestial. It was also during this period that they began to develop their visual aesthetic. The tropical setting encouraged a more relaxed, colorful approach to performance, a departure from the serious, often somber presentation that characterized much of the folk scene. Michelle, with her natural California beauty and fashion sense, began to experiment with flowing fabrics and vibrant colors that would later become part of the Mamas and the Papas' signature look. But the Virgin Islands were just a way station. The real destination was always California, the place where dreams came true and where the perfect weather provided the ideal backdrop for the perfect sound. By 1965, they had made the decision to head west, driving across the country in a used car loaded with guitars, dreams, and the demo recordings that would eventually change their lives. The drive itself was an adventure, a cross-country odyssey that took them through the heart of America and into the promised land of California. They drove through the desert Southwest, watching the landscape gradually transform from the familiar forests of the East to the alien beauty of the Mojave, until finally they crested the San Gabriel Mountains and saw Los Angeles spread out below them like a glittering carpet of possibility. Their first apartment in Los Angeles was nothing special, a small place in the Hollywood Hills that they shared with another aspiring musician. But it was California, and that made all the difference. The air was warm and clean, the sky was perpetually blue, and everywhere they looked, they saw other young people who had come west to pursue their dreams. The folk scene in Los Angeles was different from New York, more relaxed, more open to experimentation, more willing to embrace the kind of harmony-rich sound that John and Michelle were developing. It was in Los Angeles that they began to meet the other musicians who would eventually become part of their musical family. The folk clubs of the Sunset Strip, places like the Troubadour and the Whiskey A Go-Go, were breeding grounds for new talent, and John and Michelle quickly became part of the scene, attending shows, making connections, and gradually building the network of relationships that would lead to the formation of the Mamas and the Papas. The migration west wasn't just geographical, it was spiritual, emotional, and artistic. In leaving the East Coast behind, John and Michelle Phillips weren't just changing their address, they were transforming themselves from struggling folk musicians into architects of a new kind of American music. The California dream they had sung about in that freezing New York apartment was becoming reality, one harmony at a time.
Chapter 3. Monday, Monday, Finding Mama Cass and Papa Denny. How 4 distinct voices became one legendary sound. The transformation from John and Michelle Phillips to the Mamas and the Papas required more than just a change of geography. It demanded the perfect chemistry of 4 distinct personalities. The process of finding the right voices to complete their sound was like assembling a musical puzzle, where each piece had to fit perfectly with the others to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Enter Ellen Naomi Cohen, better known as Mama Cass Elliot, a powerhouse vocalist from Baltimore with a voice that could fill a cathedral and a personality that could light up a room. Cass's journey to Los Angeles had been equally circuitous, having performed with various folk groups, including the Big Three and the Mugwumps. At nearly 300 pounds, she was hardly the typical image of a 1960s pop star. But her voice was pure magic, rich, warm, and emotionally resonant in a way that could make grown men weep. Cass had grown up in Baltimore, the daughter of a delicatessen owner, and her childhood had been marked by both musical talent and personal struggle. She had been singing since she was a child, but her size had always made her feel like an outsider, even in the accepting world of folk music. What she lacked in conventional beauty, however, she more than made up for in talent and charisma. Her voice was an instrument of extraordinary range and power, capable of delivering both tender ballads and soaring anthems with equal conviction. The Mugwumps, the group that had brought Cass to national attention, also included another crucial piece of the puzzle: Dennis Dougherty, the Canadian charmer with the golden voice who would become the final member of the Mamas and the Papas. Denny, as he was known to his friends, possessed a tenor voice of remarkable clarity and emotional depth. Born in Halifax, Nova Scotia, he had been part of the Canadian folk scene before making his way to New York and eventually to Los Angeles. Denny's voice was the perfect complement to the Phillips harmonies. Where John provided the rhythmic foundation and Michelle the ethereal top notes, Denny filled the crucial middle range, his tenor weaving through the other voices like golden thread through a tapestry. More than that, he possessed a natural charm and stage presence that made him an ideal frontman, capable of connecting with audiences in a way that was both intimate and universal. The formation of the Mamas and the Papas wasn't the result of a formal audition process or a carefully planned business venture. Instead, it was the organic result of friendship, musical compatibility, and the kind of serendipity that seemed to define the Los Angeles music scene of the mid-1960s. John and Michelle had met Cass and Denny through the interconnected web of folk musicians who populated the clubs and coffee houses of both coasts. The first time all four voices came together was at a small gathering in someone's apartment, probably in the Hollywood Hills, where informal jam sessions were a regular occurrence. John was playing guitar, working through some new material, when the others began to add their voices. What happened next was pure magic, the kind of moment that musicians dream about but rarely experience. The harmony that emerged from their first informal session was unlike anything any of them had heard before. It wasn't just that their voices blended well, it was that they seemed to complete each other, creating a sound that was rich, complex, and emotionally overwhelming. John's baritone provided the foundation, Michelle's soprano soared above, Cass's alto anchored the middle, and Denny's tenor wove through it all, creating a tapestry of sound that was both contemporary and timeless. The group's name came from the song they were working on, California Dreaming, which John had written with Michelle back in New York. The lyric, "All the leaves are brown and the sky is gray," had become their unofficial motto, and the idea of mamas and papas suggested the kind of familial warmth and intimacy that characterized their sound. They weren't just a band, they were a musical family, complete with all the love, conflict, and complexity that families entail. Each member brought something unique to the group dynamic. John was the leader, the primary songwriter and arranger, with a vision for what the group could become. Michelle was the beauty, the California dream made flesh, with a voice that could make angels weep. Cass was the soul, the emotional center of the group, whose powerful voice could convey both joy and heartbreak with equal conviction. And Denny was the heart, the charming Canadian whose voice and personality provided the perfect bridge between the others. The chemistry between them was immediately apparent to anyone who heard them perform. Their voices didn't just blend, they conversed, creating a musical dialogue that was both intimate and universal. By the end of 1965, it was clear that they had found something special. The four voices that had come together almost by accident had created a sound that was uniquely their own, a harmony that would soon captivate the world and define the California sound for generations to come. The mamas and the papas had been born, and the music world would never be the same.
Chapter 4. Dedicated to the one I love, the Bel Air Sanctuary. Inside the mansion that became the headquarters of California Dreaming, by 1966, success had afforded John and Michelle Phillips something most musicians could only dream of: a sprawling Bel Air mansion that would become the unofficial headquarters of the Mamas and the Papas. The house at 783 Bel Air Road wasn't just a residence, it was a creative sanctuary where the group's distinctive sound was born, nurtured, and perfected. With its panoramic views of Los Angeles spread out below like a glittering carpet, the mansion provided the perfect backdrop for the California dreaming aesthetic that would define their music. The mansion itself was a testament to the rapid success that had transformed four struggling folk musicians into pop superstars almost overnight. California Dreaming had become a massive hit, climbing to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and establishing the group as a major force in popular music. The money that flowed from that success and the hits that followed allowed John and Michelle to purchase not just a house, but a palace, a 10,000-square-foot Mediterranean-style villa perched high in the hills above Beverly Hills. The approach to the house was dramatic, winding up through carefully manicured gardens and past a series of terraced lawns that seemed to cascade down the hillside like green waterfalls. The front entrance, with its massive wooden doors and stone archway, suggested both luxury and artistic sensibility. But it was the interior that truly captured the essence of what the Mamas and the Papas were all about.
The living room was the heart of the house, a vast space with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the city below. The room was furnished with an eclectic mix of antiques and contemporary pieces, creating an atmosphere that was both elegant and comfortable. Persian rugs covered the hardwood floors, and the walls were adorned with artwork that John and Michelle had collected during their travels. But the most important feature of the living room was its acoustics. The high ceilings and hardwood floors created a natural resonance that was perfect for vocal harmony. John had recognized this immediately, and the room quickly became an informal recording studio where the group would spend hours crafting their intricate vocal arrangements. The grand piano, positioned near the windows to take advantage of the natural light, became the centerpiece of their creative process. Michelle would later describe these sessions as magical, with the four voices blending together as naturally as the California sunshine streaming through the windows. The house itself seemed to inspire their music, with each room offering a different acoustic environment and a different mood. The library, with its dark wood paneling and built-in bookshelves, was perfect for more intimate acoustic sessions. The sunroom, with its glass walls and tropical plants, provided a lighter, more airy sound.
Chapter 5. Creek Alley, the creative process. Inside the Bel Air mansion, creativity didn't just happen, it bloomed like wildflowers in every forgotten corner. John would rise before dawn, tiptoeing through quiet hallways to the piano, melodies chasing each other through his mind. Often he'd scribble lyrics by candlelight, the room still heavy with sleep and yesterday's laughter. Cass, drawn by the faint music, would drift in next, still wrapped in her nightgown. Her voice, rough from sleep, carried a magic that startled them both. Soon Michelle would wander in, hair tangled, eyes bright, humming counter melodies that twined delicately around Cass's notes. Denny might pad in with a grin, cradling his guitar. By mid-morning, the house vibrated with layered harmonies and half-finished thoughts that might turn into hits. It was chaos that felt like ritual. John thrived on tiny experiments, changing a single chord, nudging a harmony higher, asking Cass to drop into her smoky lower register just to see what happened. They'd break into laughter when it clashed, then try again, determined to chase down perfection. The house itself seemed to encourage it, windows thrown wide to catch breezes that carried birdsong and distant city noise into their sessions. When they finally laid down Creek Alley, it felt like a diary set to music. The song was playful, sly, stuffed with winks at old friends and sly nods to failures turned fortune. Every line was a breadcrumb from their past, New York folk clubs, island escapades, the tumble of friendships and bands that didn't last. Yet beneath the clever lyrics was a pulse of genuine wonder. How had four voices from scattered corners of the continent collided so perfectly here in California? Nights often ended in the garden, voices blending under lanterns and stars, wine glasses tipped toward the moon. Those evenings were their secret recipe, where affection and minor rivalries simmered down into trust. In those moments, it felt like they could keep spinning gold forever.
Chapter 6. I Saw Her Again, Love, Betrayal, and Musical Genius. Yet not all that the mansion held was joy. As the band's success soared, tensions tangled like vines. The biggest fracture came quietly at first, furtive looks, long silences, then stolen moments between Michelle and Denny that neither could disguise for long. When John learned of the affair, it was as if a fault line cracked beneath them. Cass tried to soothe everyone, using her humor to patch over wounds, but the hurt ran deep.
John, ever the craftsman, poured his anguish into music. I Saw Her Again emerged not as a condemnation, but a strangely buoyant confession. Its upbeat, almost teasing melody belied lyrics raw with personal truth. Recording it was an emotional minefield. John, demanding as ever, pushed for take after take, forcing them all to relive the betrayal while chasing flawless execution. The studio sessions stretched late into the night. Cass would throw her arms around Michelle between takes, whispering encouragement. Denny, caught in a guilt he struggled to voice, sang with a naked edge that made the track shimmer with uneasy brilliance. Sometimes, John would close his eyes at the console, hands pressed to his temples, listening not just for notes out of place, but for cracks in their fragile unity. Outside the studio, the mansion felt it too. Shared breakfasts were quieter, the old easy banter dulled. Yet somehow, when they sang, the pain became alchemy. Listeners heard only joy, felt only sunshine, unaware that beneath the golden harmonies lay fresh bruises. Over time, the wounds scarred over, but never quite healed. Their creative flame burned even hotter for it, paradoxically fueled by heartbreak and regret. In I Saw Her Again, they captured something uniquely human, a contradiction of betrayal wrapped in irresistible melody. It became a mirror for their tangled lives, proving that sometimes the most exquisite art grows from the deepest fractures.
Chapter 7. Safe in My Garden, The Peak Years. Between 1966 and 1968, the Bel Air Mansion wasn't simply a residence or a recording studio. It was a vibrant, creative sanctuary where the mamas and the papas reached the zenith of their musical journey. This period marked the pinnacle of their collective artistry, blending the radiant California sun with their unique sound and personal stories that shaped their music. Mornings in the mansion were slow to awaken. Light spilled through the towering windows, casting warm pools of gold on the hardwood floors. The air smelled of fresh citrus and coffee brewing in the kitchen, where Cass Elliot often took command, preparing lavish breakfasts that nourished the body and soul. Her laughter was a staple ingredient, echoing off the walls as she hummed new melodies while chopping fruit or stirring pots. Michelle, barefoot and graceful, drifted through the rooms like a dancer in a dream, her voice growing ever more assured and nuanced. John, relentless and driven, prowled the house from room to room, a notebook in hand, scribbling lyrics, tweaking melodies, always searching for that elusive perfection. Denny balanced between the two, his easy charm and steady tenor voice providing an emotional anchor during sessions that could be intense and exhausting. Their days were a mixture of deep focus and carefree moments. They spent hours layering harmonies in the mansion's airy living room, experimenting with vocal textures and instrumental arrangements. Sessions could stretch into the early morning, fueled by cigarettes, wine, and bursts of creative energy. The mansion itself seemed alive with music, walls absorbing every note, every whispered harmony, every burst of laughter or frustration. Safe in My Garden emerged from this fertile environment as a tender invitation to find peace and sanctuary amid the chaos swirling outside their walls. The song's delicate arrangement and heartfelt lyrics mirrored the dual nature of their lives, a balance of turmoil and tranquility. Their voices intertwined in a way that seemed almost otherworldly, weaving a protective cocoon for themselves and their listeners. But behind the music, the pressures of fame and the complexities of their relationships simmered beneath the surface.
The mansion witnessed moments of joy, but also episodes of conflict and vulnerability. Late-night arguments gave way to heartfelt reconciliations, and the line between work and personal life often blurred. Friends from the music world often stopped by, filling the rooms with stories, laughter, and the rich hum of camaraderie. These gatherings were both a source of inspiration and occasional distraction, adding to the vibrant tapestry of their days. Despite the challenges, the mamas and the papas remained committed to their shared vision. The mansion became a symbol of their journey, a place where 4 distinct personalities melded into a singular, powerful voice that captured the spirit of an era.
Chapter 8: Words of Love, the Legacy. As the decade turned and the cultural landscape shifted, the mamas and the papas found themselves at a crossroads. The intense camaraderie and creative synergy that had defined their rise began to fray under the strain of changing personal dynamics and the relentless demands of the music industry. Words of Love stands as a poignant closing chapter, both musically and personally. The song reflects a bittersweet farewell, a tender acknowledgement of love's enduring power even as paths diverge. Its gentle harmonies and evocative lyrics carry the weight of years spent together, the triumphs, the heartaches, and the shared dreams. The once bustling Bel Air mansion slowly quieted as members pursued solo ventures and new directions. Michelle explored acting and solo music, bringing the essence of the mamas and the papas with her into new realms. John's songwriting and production talents flourished, influencing countless artists and defining the sound of a generation. Cass, with her powerful presence and warm voice, embraced new musical challenges until her untimely passing. Denny continued his musical journey, his voice a lingering echo of the group's golden era. Though the band's time together waned, their music continued to resonate deeply. Their songs became timeless anthems of youth, hope, and the eternal allure of California dreaming. They captured moments of joy, struggle, and vulnerability in a way that remains profoundly relatable. The mansion, their once thriving creative hub, now stands as a silent testament to their legacy. Its walls hold memories of laughter, tears, late-night sessions, and the magic that happens when 4 voices come together in harmony. The story of the mamas and the papas is a reminder of the transformative power of music, the way it can shape lives, reflect eras, and connect souls across generations. Their harmonies live on, an enduring call to dream, to love, and to find your own sanctuary in the world.
inside the psychedelic birth of the Grateful Dead, from warlocks to acid tests. Introduction: Finding the Sound. If you want to hear the story, you have to step back, not just in years, but in mind and spirit. It's the Bay Area, mid-1960s. I'm just a wide-eyed witness stumbling into the electric fog of music, rebellion, and an awakening culture. The streets of San Francisco pulse with energy, some of it new, some of it ancient. Guitars ring out from coffee houses, poets spout manifestos under neon light. In this roiling cauldron is a group of young musicians searching for something beyond the ordinary. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to reinvent American music. The story starts with the Warlocks, before the skeleton dancing bears and the legion of loyal deadheads, back when the adventure was just beginning. Chapter 1: The Birth of the Warlocks. The Warlocks didn't exactly start out as harbingers of a musical revolution. They were 5 guys and a heap of borrowed amplifiers finding each other through the small, weird world of Palo Alto, a cradle of suburban normalcy invaded by restless youth and big dreams. Jerry Garcia wasn't just a guitarist. He was a troubadour with a quick laugh, encyclopedic memory, and gift for improvisation. Bob Weir, impossibly young, gravitated toward Jerry's orbit, with Phil Lesh, a budding avant-garde composer, on bass, Bill Kreutzmann keeping unique time on drums, and Pigpen, Mr. R&B, a harmonica-wielding bluesman on keys and vocals. They made a motley crew. On crowded stages in pizza parlors and local coffee houses, the Warlocks cut their teeth, blending folk, jug band tunes, rootsy blues, and the first sparkles of 60s rock. Their sets were loose, spontaneous, electrified in more ways than one. The crowd? Friends, townies, and occasionally well-lubricated troublemakers. But the boundaries didn't matter. Something in the music was already reaching past the ordinary. There was a sense, even then, that things were about to break open. In Palo Alto's subterranean scene, seeds were planted, friendships forged, and the musical chemistry that would later blossom as the Grateful Dead began to ignite. Chapter 2: Enter the Merry Pranksters. Around this time, a different kind of storm was brewing close by. The Merry Pranksters, led by the enigmatic novelist Ken Kesey. Picture a kaleidoscopic pack of artists, poets, oddballs, and seekers, embarked on a mission to upend reality as we knew it. Their vehicle was, further, a day-glow-painted bus, and their fuel was LSD, still legal and just slipping into the mainstream. Kesey's parties, called the acid tests, were part performance art, part spiritual quest. Neon projections flickered across walls, and the air hummed with possibility, laughter, and the unmistakable tang of nerves. The pranksters believed in dissolving boundaries with abandon, between the straight world and the weird, between control and surrender. The same word-of-mouth grapevine that fed the Warlocks audience soon delivered them into the center of this blurry, buzzing circus. It was an invitation not just to play music, but to transform it. To see what might happen when you gave yourself over fully to improvisation and the unknown. The Warlocks couldn't resist.
Their journey with the acid tests, and by extension, the history of rock music, had begun. Chapter 3: The Acid Tests. Music, Madness, and Magic. Walking into an acid test, even now, is like trespassing through a dream. Imagine a warehouse or crumbling hall, alive with swirling oil projections, random flashes of color, black lights glimmering, and everywhere you look, people in costume or face paint, grinning and whirling, wrapped in the throes of psilocybin and LSD.
Chapter 4: The Dead Find Their Name. It's almost mythic the way the name came about. The Warlocks, now a local fixture at acid tests and small clubs, discovered their moniker was already in use by an East Coast band. No one remembers whose idea it was, but legend has it, one day, Jerry Garcia flipped open an old dictionary and his finger landed on Grateful Dead. The words stopped the room. Ancient. Strange. There was a story there if you looked for it, about a wandering spirit finding peace, about second chances, and about the boundary between what's known and what's beyond. For a gang of cosmic explorers and blues freaks, Grateful Dead was the perfect fit. The name was passed around in laughter and awe, and just like that, the band became the Grateful Dead, wiser, weirder, and destined for immortality. Fans caught wind quickly. The new name, with its folkloric edge, perfectly suited the undercurrent of magic and the sense of otherworldly wonder that clung to every show, every acid test. Chapter 5: Psychedelic Alchemy, The Dead's Evolution. The acid tests became an ongoing laboratory, not just for synthesizing LSD, but for hatching a new musical consciousness. Phones didn't record. Every moment was ephemeral, thrilling, and unrepeatable. That embraced uncertainty became the Grateful Dead's musical incubator. At every test, they freed themselves more from the constraints of set lists and rigid performance. Dark Star and Viola Lee blues became living entities, stretching for 20, 30 minutes, mutating with every interaction from the crowd, Keesley, or some random muse. The band learned to listen deeply, to respond to a glance, a mood, a swirl of colored light. The prankster ethos, art made in real time, nothing fixed, everything in flux, inspired the Dead to treat every concert as a once-in-a-lifetime event. It was no accident. This is how LSD worked. This is how Keesley saw the world. And this is how the scene demanded to be. What grew up around them was more a living ritual than a rock show, giving birth to a new sense of musical community. Chapter 6: Forging the Deadhead Community. If the acid tests were a laboratory, they also seeded a movement. Fans, freaks, heads, students, dropouts started following the band from bash to bash, reveling in the unpredictability, swapping stories, recording sets on battered reel-to-reel tape decks. These early followers were more than fans. They were fellow travelers, plugged into the shape-shifting mythos the band was creating in real time. The Deadhead was born not from marketing, but from pure, shared experience, from trusting that something, some magic, would happen if you just showed up and let go. The Dead's ethos, radically inclusive, open-ended, always evolving, echoed that community spirit. Whether you joined because you love blues, sonic experimentation, the freedom, or just the spectacle, you were part of the story.
Janis Joplin, the voice that changed rock and roll. Settle in, close your eyes, and let me tell you a story about a girl who turned her loneliness into lightning. In the oil refinery town of Port Arthur, Texas, where the air clings thick with salt and smoke and the Gulf breeze carries both dreams and dust, a girl was born on January 19th, 1943. Her name was Janis Lynn Joplin. Before the world would hear her scream with soul and fury, before Monterey, before Woodstock, before she became the queen of rock and roll, Janis was a quiet girl who sang herself to sleep. Her mother, Dorothy, once scribbled a note on the back of a family photo. Janis sings herself to sleep. That was Janis. Music before words, feeling before form. Even then, in her small bedroom overlooking the industrial skyline, she was trying to turn her loneliness into something beautiful. Picture her there, a small figure curled beneath worn quilts, humming melodies that didn't exist yet, creating lullabies from the rhythm of her own heartbeat. The oil refinery lights twinkled like fallen stars beyond her window, and somewhere in that glow, a legend was learning to breathe. The seeds of song. The Joplin house on Proctor Street was neat, orderly, respectable. Her father, Seth, was an engineer at Texaco, a quiet man who solved problems with precision and patience. Her mother, Dorothy, taught business classes at Lamar College, where young women learned to type and file and keep their voices measured. But from the beginning, Janis was different. While other children played house or cowboys, she would sit at the old upright piano, picking out melodies by ear. Her stubby fingers found chords that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. She was always making noise, her mother would later remember with a smile. Not bad noise, just different noise. The family attended the First Christian Church, where Janis joined the choir at age 7. The church was a red brick building with stained glass windows that painted rainbow patterns on Sunday mornings. But it was the music that drew her, the way voices could blend and soar, how a room full of people could become one sound, one breath. Her voice, even then, didn't quite fit in. It was too big for the hymns, too raw for the refined melodies. The choir director would gently suggest she sing more softly, but Janis didn't know how to be soft. Her voice was like her personality, all or nothing. At home, she discovered her father's old records tucked away in a closet. Hank Williams, Leadbelly, Bessie Smith. She would play them on the family's console stereo, dancing alone in the living room while her parents worked in the kitchen. These weren't the polite songs from church or the sweet pop tunes her classmates liked.
These were songs that told the truth about heartbreak and hard times, about longing and loss. Late at night, when the house grew quiet and the refinery settled into its steady hum, Janis would lie in bed and sing herself to sleep with these melodies. Her voice would float through the thin walls, mixing with the industrial symphony outside, a girl's dreams dancing with the working world's reality. The misfit years. Thomas Jefferson High School was a battlefield dressed up as education. Port Arthur in the 1950s had rules, unspoken but ironclad. Girls were expected to be pretty, quiet, and agreeable. Boys were expected to be strong, silent, and destined for the plant. Everyone had their place in the great machinery of small-town life. Janis never found her place. She walked the hallways like a question mark in a world of periods. While other girls teased their hair into perfect bouffants and painted their lips pink, Janis wore her dark hair loose and wild. She preferred men's shirts to dresses, boots to heels. She read books instead of fashion magazines, wrote poetry instead of love letters. The cruelty wasn't casual. It was coordinated. Pig and freak. The names followed her from class to class, a chorus of conformity trying to shame her into shape. But here's the thing about misfits. Sometimes they refuse to fit, not because they can't, but because they won't. They laughed me out of class, out of town, and out of the state, she would later say. But somehow, I always had a guitar. The guitar was a cheap acoustic her father bought her for Christmas when she was 15. It had steel strings that cut her fingers until calluses formed, a neck that felt too wide for her small hands, but when she wrapped her arms around it, something clicked into place. She learned to play by listening to records, rewinding the same song over and over until her fingers found the patterns. Leadbelly's Goodnight Irene, Odetta's folk ballads, and always, always the blues. She would sit in her bedroom or sneak into empty classrooms, playing and singing for an audience of dust motes and dreams. Her friend Grant Lyons, one of the kids who didn't seem to mind her differentness, introduced her to more music. He had a record collection that was like a library of American pain and joy. Ma Rainey, Billie Holiday, Big Mama Thornton. These were women who didn't apologize for taking up space, who turned their troubles into triumph. She showed me the air and taught me how to fill it, Janis said about Bessie Smith. She's the reason I started singing, really. Those voices, the mothers of the blues, they didn't ask permission. They didn't smooth the edges. They bled and howled and roared, and they showed a lonely girl in Texas that there was power in being different, strength in being real. First Flight. In December 1962, Janis made her first recording. It was at a tiny studio in Beaumont, just a few songs for a local label that would never amount to much. The recording was raw, imperfect, honest, qualities that would define everything she ever did. Sitting in that cramped booth, wearing a borrowed dress and her best attempt at respectability, she opened her mouth and let loose. The engineer looked up in surprise. This wasn't the sweet folk singer he'd expected. This was something wilder, something untamed. The songs weren't trying to be pretty, neither was she. And in that moment, Janis discovered something crucial. She didn't want to be pretty. She wanted to be real. High school limped toward graduation like a wounded animal. While her classmates planned weddings and careers, Janis planned her escape. She'd been accepted to the University of Texas at Austin, not exactly the bright lights in big city, but it was wider than Port Arthur, weirder, looser. Her graduation photo shows a young woman with serious eyes and a slight smile, as if she's already looking past the camera towards something the rest of us can't see. The inscription in her yearbook, written by classmates who never really knew her, was prophetic in its cruelty. Most likely to succeed at nothing. They were wrong, of course, but they were also right in a way. Janis would succeed at nothing. Nothing conventional, nothing expected, nothing safe. She would succeed at being completely, authentically herself, which in 1960s America was perhaps the most radical thing a woman could do. Austin Nights. The University of Texas at Austin in 1960 was a world away from Port Arthur. The campus sprawled along the Colorado River, dotted with limestone buildings and live oak trees that had stood there longer than Texas had been a state. It was a place where ideas could breathe, where different was less dangerous. She studied art because what else do you study when your talent doesn't fit the categories? She painted abstract pieces that looked like her voice sounded. Bold strokes in unexpected colors, emotions too big for the canvas. Her professors didn't know what to make of her work, but they couldn't ignore it. More importantly, she discovered Threadgill's. Threadgill's was a gas station turned beer joint on the outskirts of town where country music and folk songs mixed with the smell of barbecue and the clink of long-necked bottles. Kenneth Threadgill had been singing since the 1930s, and he welcomed anyone who could carry a tune and wasn't afraid to try. Wednesday night.
Electric Awakening. Big Brother and the Holding Company was jamming in a warehouse in the Haight when Janis walked in for her first rehearsal. The band, Peter Albin on bass, Sam Andrew on guitar, Dave Getz on drums, and James Gurley on lead guitar, looked up as this small woman with wild hair and worn jeans entered their space. They'd heard she could sing, but San Francisco was full of people who thought they could sing. What they didn't expect was what happened when Janis opened her mouth. The first note that came out wasn't a note at all. It was a primal scream, a blues howl that seemed to tear through the fabric of reality itself. It was every lonely night in Port Arthur, every cruel word in high school, every moment of pain and beauty and longing wrapped up in pure sound. The music stopped. The room went silent. Then someone started banging on the wall from next door. Then someone else was pounding on the door. Within minutes, the police arrived, convinced that someone was being murdered in the warehouse. Peter Albin met them at the door, laughing nervously. No, it's okay. That's just Janis. What they didn't know yet was that this voice, this force of nature, was about to take them farther than they ever imagined. The band had been good before Janis arrived. Solid musicians playing the kind of experimental rot that was emerging from the San Francisco scene. But Janis didn't just sing with them, she transformed them. Her voice gave their music teeth, turned their experimental jams into something primal and powerful. They started playing the Fillmore, the Avalon Ballroom, all the venues where the new sound was being born. Audiences who came expecting typical psychedelic rock found themselves confronted with something unprecedented. A woman who sang like her life depended on it, because it did. "You can destroy your now by worrying about tomorrow," she once said. And on stage, she lived that philosophy completely. She emptied herself into every song, held nothing back, gave everything she had to the moment. The weight of being different. After Monterey, the world wanted to know everything about Janis Joplin. Who was this woman who sang like lightning and looked like no one they'd ever seen before? But fame, as Janis quickly learned, was a double-edged gift.
The magazines wanted to photograph her, but they didn't know what to do with her wild hair and unconventional beauty. They'd ask her to pose like other singers, demure, pretty, safe. She'd laugh and shake her head. "Honey, I'm not trying to be pretty. I'm trying to be real." The music industry was built for men who played guitars and women who looked good holding microphones. Janis didn't fit either category. She commanded the stage like a man, but felt everything like a woman who'd been told her whole life she was too much. In interviews, reporters would ask her about her love life, her appearance, her clothes, rarely about her music. They wanted to understand how someone who looked like her could sound like that, as if power and beauty had only one acceptable form. But Janis had learned something important during those lonely years in Port Arthur. Being different wasn't a flaw to fix, it was a strength to embrace. She started wearing more colorful clothes, more jewelry, more of everything. Feathers and beads, velvet and silk. If the world was going to stare anyway, she'd give them something worth looking at. On stage, I make love to 25,000 people, then I go home alone. The loneliness followed her, even to the heights of success. Hotel rooms in strange cities, surrounded by people who wanted something from her, she'd still find herself singing softly to herself before sleep. The same girl from Texas, just with a bigger audience for her dreams. Southern comfort and searching hearts. By 1968, Janis had become inseparable from her bottle of Southern comfort. It wasn't just a drink. It was liquid courage, a way to quiet the voice in her head that still whispered the cruel words from her childhood. She'd take the stage with the bottle in hand, taking swigs between songs like she was drinking from the fountain of her own power. The audience loved it. It was part of the show, part of the Janis mythology. But backstage, away from the lights and cheers, it was something else entirely. The whiskey helped her sleep in unfamiliar beds. It helped her forget the reviews that focused more on her appearance than her voice. It helped her navigate the music industry, a world of men in suits who saw her as both a commodity and an oddity. She searched for love in all the expected places, and some unexpected ones. Men who promised to understand her, women who shared her rebellious spirit, anyone who might see past the wild exterior to the tender heart beneath. I'd rather have 10 years of super hyper most than live to be 70 by sitting in some goddamn chair watching TV, she told a reporter. But late at night, when the parties ended and the crowds went home, she sometimes wondered if there might be a middle ground between burning bright and fading away. The bottle became her most reliable companion, never judging, never leaving, always there when the world felt too heavy or too light. It was a love affair that would define her as much as her music, though she never would have called it love. Love to Janis was supposed to heal you, not slowly destroy you. The search for home in music. Between the fame and the touring and the interviews, Janis was always searching for something that felt like home. Not the physical home in Port Arthur that had never quite fit, but a musical home, a place where her voice could rest and be understood. Big Brother had been family, but families sometimes outgrow each other. The band's loose, psychedelic style had been perfect for the early days, but Janis's voice was evolving, demanding more precision, more space to breathe and roar. She spent hours listening to records in her hotel rooms, not just blues and rock, but gospel, country, soul. Each genre offered something different. The raw emotion of Aretha Franklin, the storytelling of Hank Williams, the pure power of Big Mama Thornton. She was building a musical vocabulary that was entirely her own. I'm not a blues singer, I'm not a rock singer, I'm not a folk singer, I'm just a singer. But finding musicians who could match her intensity while giving her the freedom to explore was like searching for other members of her tribe. She needed players who understood that music wasn't just entertainment, it was survival, communication, a way of touching something sacred. The Cosmic Blues Band was her first attempt at creating this musical home. Horn sections and tighter arrangements, a sound that could contain her voice without constraining it. The critics were mixed, the fans divided, but Janis was learning, growing, refusing to be trapped in the image of who she'd been at Monterey. Every night on stage was an experiment. Some songs landed like lightning, others crashed and burned. But each performance taught her something new about her own power, her own limits, her own endless capacity for reinvention. She was still the girl who sang herself to sleep, but now she was learning to sing herself awake too, to face each new day with curiosity instead of just courage, to find in music not just escape, but transformation.
The fall and rise. By 1965, Janis was dissolving. The drugs, methamphetamine, heroin, anything that would quiet the storm inside her head had taken control. Her once powerful voice was failing, her body was failing, her spirit was almost gone. Her friends in San Francisco watched in horror as she faded away. This vibrant, powerful woman who could command a room with a single note was becoming a ghost. They staged interventions, offered help, begged her to get clean. Finally, scared and sick, and barely recognizable as the girl who'd left Texas with such high hopes, Janis did something that took more courage than any stage performance. She went home. The return to Port Arthur was a retreat that felt like a defeat. Her parents, who'd watched their daughter's transformation with concern and confusion, welcomed her back with love and fear. She was gaunt, hollow-eyed, a shadow of the young woman who'd left to conquer the world. But sometimes we have to fall completely before we can rise. Janis enrolled in secretarial school, learned to type, tried to fit into the conventional life she'd spent years rejecting. She got clean, slowly and painfully, her body learning to exist without chemical support. She sang only in private now, humming to herself as she practiced shorthand and filing. For a while, it seemed like the dream was over. The girl who'd sung herself to sleep had gone quiet, accepting the ordinary life that Port Arthur had always expected of her. But dreams, real dreams, don't die easily. They just wait. The call back. In 1966, the phone rang in the Joplin house on Proctor Street. On the other end was Chet Helms, an old friend from the Austin music scene who'd made his way to San Francisco. He was managing a psychedelic rock band called Big Brother and the Holding Company, and they needed a singer. They needed her. "We're getting a chance to play the big festivals," he told her. "The music scene out here is exploding. Are you ready to come back?" Janis stood in her parents' kitchen, the phone pressed to her ear, and felt something stir in her chest, something that had been sleeping for months. The voice that had carried her this far wasn't gone. It had just been resting, gathering strength. She looked around at the neat, safe life she'd built in Port Arthur. The secretarial certificates on the wall, the regular schedule, the predictable routine. It was everything her parents had wanted for her, everything the town expected of her. It wasn't enough. "I'll be there," she said. Packing was easier this time. She'd learned to travel light, to carry only what mattered: the guitar, the records, the dreams that had survived everything: Texas, San Francisco, addiction, failure, and redemption. This time, though, she packed something else: wisdom. She knew now what the city could offer and what it could take away. She knew her own strength and her own weakness. Most importantly, she knew that the voice inside her,
the one that sung her to sleep all those years ago, was worth fighting for.
For those who wish to follow the complete musical journey of our restless songbird, here lies the treasure map of her recorded legacy. Each album, a chapter in the story of a voice that refused to be contained. In the quiet hours after the concerts ended and the crowds dispersed, Janis would often sit alone with her records, studying them like ancient texts. Each album she made was more than just a collection of songs. It was a snapshot of her soul at a particular moment in time, a message in a bottle thrown into the vast ocean of human experience. Let us trace this musical journey together, following the breadcrumbs of her artistic evolution, from those first tentative recordings to the final triumphant statement that would outlive her by decades. The Early Whispers, 1962 to 1966. Before the world knew her name, Janis was already leaving traces of her voice in the universe. In December 1962, still a teenager carrying the wounds of Port Arthur's cruelty, she walked into a small studio in Beaumont, Texas, and recorded her first professional tracks. These weren't released during her lifetime. They lived in boxes and storage rooms, waiting decades to see the light. But listening to them now, you can hear it all beginning. The voice that would shake stadiums was already there, raw and untrained but undistinguishably powerful. She covered traditional folk songs like Turtle Blues and Black Mountain Blues, her voice carrying the weight of someone far older than her 19 years. During her Austin years, she made more recordings, informal sessions that captured her evolution from folk singer to something more dangerous. Her voice grows bolder with each session, less concerned with sounding proper and more focused on sounding true. In 1965, during her troubled first day in San Francisco, she cut 7 tracks for a small folk label called Mainstream Records. The songs, including Typewriter Talk and What Good Can Drinkin' Do, revealed an artist still searching for her identity. Her voice was strong but searching, like someone calling out in the darkness, hoping for an echo. These early recordings are like letters from a young woman to her future self, promises of the storm that was building in her chest, waiting for the right moment to break free. Big Brother and the Holding Company, 1967, The Lightning Learns to Dance. When Janis joined Big Brother and the Holding Company in 1966, something chemical happened. The band's loose, experimental style was the perfect container for her uncontainable voice. Their first album, simply titled Big Brother and the Holding Company, was released in August 1967, just 2 months after their earth-shaking performance at Monterey. It was recorded on a shoestring budget in Chicago. The album was rough around the edges, exactly as it should have been. The production was minimal, the arrangements loose, but Janis's voice cut through it all like a sword through silk. Songs like Bye Bye Baby and Women as Losers showcased her range, from tender vulnerability to primal scream, often within the same verse. The album wasn't a commercial success initially, but it established Janis as something unprecedented in popular music, a female vocalist who didn't just sing songs, but inhabited them completely, body and soul. Her cover of Big Mama Thornton's Ball and Chain was already becoming legendary, though the definitive version was still taking shape in live performances across San Francisco. Listening to this debut now is like discovering ancient cave paintings, primitive perhaps, but containing all the essential elements of something magnificent. You can hear Janis learning to work with other musicians, learning to be part of something larger than herself while never diminishing her own power. It was a document of a moment when everything was possible, when a group of misfits could plug in their instruments in a warehouse and create something that had never existed before. It was the sound of the summer of love, but with teeth. Cheap Thrills, 1968, The Storm Breaks. If the first Big Brother album was lightning gathering in the clouds, Cheap Thrills was the storm finally breaking over the world. Released in August 1968, it was everything the debut had promised and more. Raw, honest and absolutely uncompromising. The album went to #1 and stayed there, not because it was polished or radio-friendly, but because it was undeniably real. In an era when rock music was becoming increasingly sophisticated and produced, Cheap Thrills sounded like it was recorded in someone's garage by people who cared more about truth than technique. The opening track, combination of the two, announced Janis's presence like a battle cry. Her voice soared and dove, whispered and roared, often within the same line. It was a masterclass in emotional range delivered by someone who seemed incapable of holding anything back. But it was Piece of My Heart, written by Bert Burns and Jerry Ragavoy, that became her signature song during this period. Janis took what was originally a more conventional soul number and turned it into something primal and desperate. When she sang, "Take it, take another little piece of my heart now, baby," you believed she was literally offering pieces of herself to anyone brave enough to accept them. The album's centerpiece was the 9-minute epic Ball and Chain, captured live at the Fillmore West. This wasn't just a song, it was a religious experience. Janis's voice climbed and fell like a bird caught in a hurricane, carrying the listener through every emotion human beings are capable of feeling. The guitar work was hypnotic, the rhythm section thunderous, but it was Janis's voice that made the song immortal. Summertime, her take on the Gershwin classic, showed a different side of her artistry. Slowed down to a crawl and drenched in blues feeling, it became a meditation on longing and loss. Her voice, usually so powerful it could shake buildings, became intimate and vulnerable, like she was singing directly into your ear. The album cover, featuring a cartoon drawing by R. Crumb instead of a photograph, was as unconventional as the music inside. It suggested that this wasn't just another rock album, it was art, outsider art created by people who didn't care about the rules. Cheap Thrills was recorded during a time of incredible creativity and equally incredible pressure. The band was dealing with sudden fame, record company expectations, and the knowledge that whatever they did next would be measured against their breakthrough at Monterey. That they managed to create something even better than their live reputation suggested was a testament to the power of the musical chemistry between Janis and Big Brother. Listening to Cheap Thrills today is like opening a time capsule from an era when rock music was still dangerous, when artists were willing to risk everything for the sake of emotional honesty. It remains one of the greatest rock albums ever recorded, not despite its roughness, but because of it. I Got Them Old Cosmic Blues Again, Mama, 1969, The Search for Something More. By 1968, Janis was feeling constrained by Big Brother's loose, jammy style. Her voice had grown more powerful and more precise, and she needed musicians who could match her evolution. The decision to leave Big Brother was heartbreaking. They had been her family, her support system, her partners in creating something revolutionary. But artists, true artists, must follow their vision even when it leads them into uncertain territory. The Cosmic Blues Band was Janis's attempt to create a more sophisticated sound. Still powerful, still bluesy, but with the precision of a horn section and the polish of professional session musicians. The resulting album, I Got Them Old Cosmic Blues Again, Mama, released in September 1969, was a bold artistic statement that divided critics and fans. The album opened with Try, Just a Little Bit Harder, a song that seemed to sum up Janis's entire philosophy of life and art. Her voice, backed by a full horn section, was more controlled than on previous recordings, but no less powerful. The arrangement was tighter, more focused, allowing every nuance of her vocal performance to shine through. Maybe the album's most tender moment showed Janis's growing sophistication as an interpreter of songs. Her voice, usually associated with power and intensity, became vulnerable and questioning. The lyrics spoke of uncertainty and hope in equal measure, themes that would become increasingly important in her work. The title track, Cosmic Blues, was perhaps the most personal song she had recorded to that point. It was her blues.
Not the traditional 12-bar format, but something entirely her own. The lyrics spoke of feeling like an outsider even in success, of searching for meaning in a world that seemed designed to disappoint. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had achieved everything she thought she wanted, but still felt empty. The album also featured Work Me Lord, a gospel-influenced number that allowed Janis to explore her spiritual side. Her voice soared over a churchy organ and testifying chorus, finding in music the kind of transcendence that had eluded her in traditional religion. Critics were mixed on the album, some finding it too polished, others praising its sophistication. Fans were similarly divided. Many missed the raw power of Big Brother, while others appreciated Janis's artistic growth. But perhaps the most important critic was Janis herself, and she knew the album was a necessary step in her evolution, even if it wasn't entirely successful. The Cosmic Blues Band toured extensively.